Welcome to another episode of Frontier Live. Today we're talking NISMO suspension. All right guys, so let's go over what comes with the NISMO suspension components. And you can do these a la carte, or you can do them in stages. You can do stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. Right now I'm going to focus on what's considered stage 1, which is just the 1.5-inch lift kit that you can get from NISMO. It's not a leveling kit, but it gives you an inch allegedly of rear lift via a rear axle block lift, and then it's going to give you an 1.5 inches via some spacers in the front that are going to lift your truck essentially 1.5 inches in the front and 1 inch in the back to give you about 11 inches of clearance. With the 1.5-inch block, what we noticed is that you still get a little bit of rake. Not as much as factory rake, but you still get a little bit of rake, which we wanted to retain because we do tow and we do carry some weight in the back. But yeah guys, that level 1 is just going to be the spacer lift, which again, it's a block in the rear and it's going to be some spacers in the front to give you a lift. And honestly, the materials used on those blocks is awesome. They're steel, they have the nice NISMO stamp on them, they have really nice hardware, they have the U-bolts that extend for the leaves so that you're accounting for that lift. The front also has bump stop extenders so that it's accounting for that change in geometry. It's accounting for the lift in the front so that your bump stops work while they're at full droop. So one thing to keep in mind is that you can achieve a 3-inch lift by going with the 1.5-inch lift kit and the Bilstein struts. However, you'll have to account for the change in height in the back, meaning that with the 1.5-inch lift, you're only going to get a little bit over 1 inch lift in the rear with the block. You can set your suspension on the strut, you can set your perch to give you another 1.5 inches, so it's theoretically you'll have 3 inches in the front, but then you'd only have 1.5 inches in the rear, or 1 inch with the lift block. So if you were to do 3 inches in the front, you'd have to probably do an add a leaf in the back to give you that difference in ride height, so that you would have 3 inches all around. The way that we have it configured is we have it in the front with the 1.5-inch spacers with the Bilstein struts and springs set at factory ride height, and then in the rear we have the 1 inch, it's actually a little bit over 1 inch block, which if you can tell in this video, or like you can tell on this video, the truck still retains a little bit of rake, and that's what we wanted because we do tow with this vehicle and we do carry weight in the back. We wanted to retain a little bit of rake, but I wanted to share that with you guys because there's a lot of misconception out there or misinformation that you can achieve a 3-inch lift with the NISMO suspension components. One thing to note with the 1.5-inch lift kit is that if you just do the stage 1 or just the lift kit, you are going to have coil bucket contact. What coil bucket contact is, and I'm just going to explain this as simply as I can, but briefly, what coil bucket contact is when you do a spacer lift, you're decreasing the space between the coil bucket and the upper control arm. If you don't do the upper control arm upgrade, which I'll talk about here in a second, and you just have the factory control arms, you're going to have contact between this coil bucket here and the factory upper control arm because you've essentially reduced this space via the spacer, which is under here. So if you're planning on doing just the lift kit, beware that you are going to get coil bucket contact. Although it'll be minimal over time, that could cause catastrophic damage to your components, and you'll definitely hear it, which is why we went with the upper control arms. So in order to mitigate the coil bucket contact, we went with the NISMO upper control arms, which are forged aluminum. They're super nice, they are very stout, they are quite larger than what comes on these trucks stock. And what's cool about these is they have the Titan ball joints in here, so it's really robust, really strong, and it corrects the geometry and accounts for the lift via the spacer block. So that is something to consider, is that if you're going to do the lift kit and you're not doing a spring lift and you're going with the NISMO block lift slash spacer lift, you're going to want to do the upper control arm upgrade as well to mitigate that coil bucket contact. All right, guys, so the third and final component that goes into this full NISMO suspension setup is going to be the Bilstein performance shocks that you get from NISMO. And that includes the 6112 Bilstein struts up front with the upgraded springs, and then you're going to get the 5160 rear struts that have the piggyback reservoirs. I'll try to get a good shot of this, but essentially what you'll read on the internet, and here's kind of a good shot of them. What you'll read on the internet is that these are just rebranded 6112s and 5160s. I actually reached out to Nissan, and what they told me, what their official statement on this was, is that they're not just rebranded Bilstein 6112s and 5160s. They actually tuned and collaborated with Chris Forsberg on his Baja truck to come up with a solution that was specifically dialed in for this 3rd gen Frontier, which can also, the suspension setup can be used with the 2nd gen Frontier, but it was specifically made for this truck, and it was specifically made to improve your everyday on-road handling, to improve your off-road performance, and it was specifically made for off-roading or overlanding applications, adding more weight to the truck, whether that is through a bumper winch setup, bigger tires and wheels, or if you're going to set up for overlanding, like putting a rack in the back, putting a rooftop tent, adding overlanding accessories, etc. This suspension is set up in order to handle all that extra weight, and that is why they are not just rebranded 6112s and 5160s. They are specifically tuned for specific applications. You can't even buy the 6112s or 5160s from Bilstein for this application. But again, they're not just rebranded NISMO sticker on them. They were intentionally made to work with the other NISMO suspension components as well. So now that we've kind of done a general overview of each component separately, I want to talk about how it all comes together and how it works as a full suspension setup. So what we opted to do is go with the full NISMO suspension kit, which includes, like I mentioned, the 1.5 inch lift kit, the upper control arms, and the Bilstein struts, and then for the front it's struts and springs. We decided to do that after living with the truck in stock configuration for the first 4 months, because we wanted to get a feel of what the truck was lacking. We wanted to get a feel of what could be improved on the truck in every application that we use the truck for. So as you guys know that have been following the channel, we use the truck, I use the truck as my daily driver. It's also my adventure vehicle when we go off-road, go camping, and it's also our tow vehicle. So we tow our trailer with this truck. And so in over 4 months of owning the truck and having it in stock suspension, I felt like there was just areas that could be improved on the truck. The first thing was the stance. This lift kit gives you a really nice stance without being too egregious. So I didn't want to do a 2 or 3 inch lift. I wanted to retain the factory driving characteristics as much as possible without ruining the geometry of the driveline components. And we wanted to retain that geometry as much as possible to also extend the longevity of the truck. If you're going with, you know, a 2 inch, 3 inch lift, you're going to be wearing down those components. The geometry is going to be all messed up, and it's just, you know, we don't want to run into a situation where we are prematurely damaging any of the components, whether that's suspension or driveline. So this setup with the 1.5 inch lift kit gives the truck a really nice look. It gives you a more aggressive stance, and more importantly, it's giving us more clearance. So for when we're off-roading or adventuring, you know, we've now raised the truck, and I think it looks good. It gives it plenty of clearance. You know, stock suspension wise, the truck, like I mentioned earlier, the Pro 4X gives you about 9.5 inches in the front and 9.8 inches in the back of clearance, which is equivalent to what I had in my 5th gen 4Runner. So out of the box, it's plenty capable. But with this lift kit, you know, you just do get a little bit more clearance, which definitely helps. And I think that the stance also looks a lot better now. It looks a little bit more aggressive, makes the truck feel and look a little bit larger. And I think that it's a very reasonable upgrade that also doesn't break the bank. Because we did the lift kit, we also decided to do the upper control arms. And as I mentioned earlier, the big factor in that was to mitigate coil bucket contact. We don't want to damage or shorten the longevity of our suspension driveline components. Excuse the airplanes that are flying about, but we don't want to reduce the longevity of the driveline and suspension components. And we felt like Nissan really made a really intentional and well thought out product by providing the upper control arms and for the lift kit. And since we were doing the lift kit and the upper control arms, we decided to do the suspension as well. And the reason being is that in those 4 months of ownership with the truck, I felt like the 4600 Bilstein shocks that come stock on the Nissan Frontier, they're a very compliant and smooth shock, especially on the day-to-day. When you get off the beaten path, they tend to find their limit pretty quickly. And one thing you'll notice too from stock configuration is when you hit a big bump, or you go over a rut, or a pothole or anything like that, there's a lot of drama that happens. It does correct itself pretty quickly, but there's just this crashiness that comes with those 4600 Bilsteins that come stock from the factory. And so we felt like we needed something that was just a little bit beefier, a little bit more stout, that would make the truck more planted and would mitigate some of that movement, which these Bilstein 6112s and 5160s absolutely do. When you put the whole package together, it just felt like a very cohesive and intentional package that is, obviously backed by a warranty through Nissan, and then the labor was also backed and warranted through Nissan. Having said that, shout out to Ancira Nissan here in San Antonio. They took care of me. They're not sponsoring this video whatsoever. They're just the most responsive and knowledgeable service department that I've pretty much ever worked with. And they answered every question. They were very patient, and they were just phenomenal to work with. So shout out to John Campbell, shout out to Travis, and shout out to our master tech Josh for working on the truck, working with me, and I couldn't recommend them enough. And that was a big reason why I decided to go with the NISMO complete suspension for the Nissan Frontier. Did I consider any other suspension components, or did I consider any other companies? And the answer is yes. So originally I had reached out to All Dogs Off-Road to see if they were interested in collaborating, not by sending me product or hooking me up, but essentially what I had in mind was purchasing a suspension system from them and then driving up to Nebraska and then kind of filming the install process and film them work their magic. Ultimately, they weren't interested in the collaboration, which is completely fine. I was still planning on purchasing suspension components from them. However, as I did more research, I decided that it really boiled down to a few products. So All Dog Off-Road offers a full Coney suspension setup that I was strongly considering, and that included front and rear struts. For the front struts, it does include upgraded springs. For the rear, you do an add-a-leaf to account for the 2-inch lift. And that was the suspension components that I was considering from All Dogs Off-Road over their spacer eraser, which for that, it's a great value. I think it's probably a great product, but at the end of the day, when I was kind of comparing those two options versus the full NISMO setup, I just felt more comfortable going with NISMO because they are completely backed by Nissan. It's warranted through Nissan, and you can get it installed at a Nissan dealership, where you just have that peace of mind that Those components were intentionally built and purpose built for this platform. You don't have to worry about voiding your warranty. All the parts are warranted, and if anything comes up, you have that peace of mind that you have the dealer network working with you and you have NISMO working with you. And honestly, that was the deciding factor of going with the NISMO setup as opposed to going with the All Dogs Off-Road. I'm sure that they're super reliable and I'm sure that they're super nice guys, but I think for my money, I just preferred going with peace of mind over going with something like that Koni setup, which is being discontinued. And I just felt like for what we wanted to do, accomplish with this truck, the Spacer Racer lift kit just wasn't going to do it by itself. Now, what does it drive like? What are my first impressions with this setup now, having this setup for about a little over a month? First thing I can tell you is that it completely changes the driving dynamics of the vehicle in a good way. You still get that smooth power delivery, obviously, from the naturally aspirated V6. You get that really buttery smooth shifting from the 9-speed automatic transmission. Nothing changes there. But what you'll notice, and what I noticed off the bat, is the way that the truck drives now with the suspension and lift kit is that there is less body roll. The truck feels way more planted, and there's less weight transfer from the back to the front, which feels like it's a peppier truck. So when you have less weight transfer because it's a more stiff suspension, the truck just feels amazing to drive. It's just a lot more sporty. You can turn it into corners faster. Off the line, it just feels peppier. And like I mentioned, the suspension is stiffer. You are going to notice that, but not stiffer in a jarring or intrusive way. It just makes the truck feel more planted, more secure, and there's a lot less movement. And because of that, it does not feel as plush as you might expect. So if you're looking for a plush suspension system or something that akin to a rock crawling suspension system, this isn't the suspension system for you. This is really a suspension system, as I mentioned earlier, that was purpose built for off-roading, for keeping some weight in the back, for, you know, going with a bumper and winch setup, larger tires, wheels, maybe having a overlanding setup with a rooftop tent. So it is made to carry more weight, and because of that, it is going to be a little bit stiffer than what you might think. Now, it's not stiff, again, in an intrusive or jarring way. Over smooth pavement, it just glides. It glides over any rough stuff. You know, we have towed with this suspension setup a couple weeks back. We went camping, took the trailer. It handles the weight of the trailer beautifully. It just really does smooth out and limit a lot of the movement that you get with the stock suspension, and I couldn't be happier, honestly. You will feel the little small imperfections in the road that perhaps you didn't feel before, and that's because the suspension, because it's a little bit stiffer, you're going to get a lot more feedback from the road, and that's what you want out of an off-road suspension, is you want to have a better feel for the road. And again, it's not that you feel those imperfections in a jarring way, you just feel more of the road, but it just glides over the rough stuff. It glides over, you know, everyday driving scenarios. It's just a very smooth and very compliant and solid suspension. I didn't expect this upgrade to have such an impact. I didn't expect to like it as much. You know, the truck feels larger. I feel like I'm in a more commanding driving position because of the lift. Like I mentioned earlier, it feels like a more peppy truck, so it's just, you know, you can throw it into corners a little bit easier. Steering and cornering feels a lot more compliant. Overall, I'm very impressed with the whole suspension setup, and I would 100% do it again, and I would 100% recommend it to anyone out there. The best part is if you do the full suspension components, so you do the level 3, which is, again, the upper control arms, the lift kit, and the Bilstein struts, you know, the whole kit costs about $2,400–$2,500, which when you look at the materials that are used, when you look and compare it to anything else out on the market, it's honestly very well priced, and you get the peace of mind that it is coming from Nissan. It was purpose built for this platform. It was intentionally built and designed to work with your Nissan Frontier, and I couldn't be happier, guys, honestly. I'm very impressed with the build quality and performance of all the suspension components. I think for the money it's really hard to beat what Nissan offers you. I think especially if you're not planning on doing anything too aggressive lift wise, this is absolutely the best way to go, because it's a minimal change to your factory geometry. You're going to retain a lot of that geometry. You're not really going to mess with your driving characteristics. You're going to retain the longevity of your driveline components and your suspension components. And at the end of the day, you're going to be warranted through Nissan. All the parts are warranted through Nissan. The labor's warranted through your dealer. And it's just been a great experience. As usual, I'll do updates once we break in everything. You know, we've only had the suspension components on the truck for about a little over a month now, but we're going to be doing some more adventuring now that the weather's cooperating. We're going to go doing some camping and doing some off-roading, so we'll be doing some content related to that. But as usual, if you have questions, comments, concerns, post them down below, and we'll see you on the next one.